I'm going to tell you a couple of quick Nobel Peace Prize winner stories so you know a little bit about some of these folks. Literally came from the actions of one person that you have never heard of, I had never heard of. He was dead before I got into the business pretty much. And his name was Philip Noel Baker. He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner from Britain who had been concerned about World War I. And if you studied World War I in your classes, you know that it was supposedly a war to save democracy, and what it really did was kill 20 or 30 million people needlessly and set off anti-war and peace movements around this globe that still have some effect today. So Noel Baker showed up at Harvard. It's a school back east. It's somewhere, I think it's in Massachusetts. I can see that Harvard jokes don't work in Portland. So. And he gave a speech about the dangers of open-air nuclear testing at the time. And our founder, Bernard Lown, was sitting listening to this lecture in 1961. He was a prominent cardiologist at the Harvard Medical School. And he was so moved, so taken by Philip Noel Baker, that he realized that all of the wonderful things he had been doing in cardiology, improving people's hearts, working on valves, leading toward heart transplants, all of the marvelous medical technology would mean nothing if the world were destroyed through nuclear weapons. And being an old-time doctor of the 1960s, and things were pretty patriarchal and pretty top-down and pretty male-dominated in those days, and I know there are a number of young women in this audience who want to be doctors and they have a much clearer path than in the old days. He turned to his male assistant and said, "Alexander, we've got to do something about this." Poked him in the chest. And so Sid Alexander, who got poked by Bernard Lown, went back and started Physicians for Social Responsibility with a small group in a kitchen and began to work and plan until today. We are part of a vast movement for peace. I've won a Nobel Peace Prize. As importantly, in my view, we work globally to try and end global climate change, prevent the spread of toxic chemicals, to make sure that people in other continents get sufficient nutrition and health and grow up in the ways that we would want our own children to do. That simple development came from the words of one man, Philip Noel Baker. That is my hope today, that someone in this room, or perhaps all of you, will say, what I want to do with my life, to be a singer, a dancer, an architect, a football player, a doctor, a teacher, a laborer, is very, very important, and I want to do that well. But perhaps it isn't enough, and I need to link it with a concern for peace, and that with other people, as in this room, I can make a difference. That's what we've been doing in PSR. I know this is not an anti-war rally. We have our concerns as physicians about the war in Iraq. And the way we approach it is that we are equally concerned about American GIs, Marines. We celebrate, as do you, the return of prisoners of war. If you look at this morning's headlines, you will see and feel the joy of the release of these people. What is sometimes lacking in our media coverage, in our hearts, in our concerns, is the same feelings with Iraqi soldiers, many of whom were conscripts, were Iraqi civilians, who've been living in near refugee camp situations since 1991 and the end of the First War, a place where over half of the people in Iraq are children. I am looking out at Iraq as I look at you. There are more than half of the people there are under the age of 15. But differently than in the United States, 1 in 8 children in Iraq dies before the age of 5. And the infant mortality rate is over 130 per 1,000. That's the result of having been caught up in a previous war. Whatever the rights and wrongs, we cannot forget that there are real people. Aubrey Raymond, the person sitting next to you, your brother or sister, who are feeling and observing the horrors of warfare. And that's the piece that is so hard. When I was in Africa just this summer at the World Summit for Sustainable Development, trying to, with 60,000 people from around the globe, to build a better world, what I was aware of was that 15 million people are about to die in southern Africa. Not all of Africa, southern Africa. I met with the ministers of health, the ministers of environment, the foreign ministers of those nations. And they said the big countries sit and they talk and they argue, and maybe they give $500 million. Even as the United States is increasing its military budget, at that time by an extra supplemental of $48 billion, we now know that there will be hundreds of billions spent as a result of this war and afterwards. But the combination in southern Africa of AIDS, of hunger, of poverty, of drought being brought on by global climate change, of watching mothers walk along the road carrying water for miles because there's no safe drinking water, of watching young boys pick up sticks off the road to try to get some fuel to cook a meal, or scrounge some sugar cane from the side of the road to get something to eat, is something that you and I need to feel very deeply. I am not a saint. I really am not Mother Teresa. I often go about my business and I don't think about the kids in Africa, and I don't think about people in Iraq. And there are plenty of people to worry about in this country. So I have to say to myself, what would it feel like if I were an Iraqi child, a child in South Africa, in Swaziland, in Tanzania, in Mozambique, in those places that when I was in junior high were just green and pink blobs on a map that I didn't know much about. And so in school, I think it's particularly important not only to practice and live nonviolence, to learn about conflict resolution, as Gary said, to be peaceful, but I have to tell you that I think it's also important to learn more than I did, to find what it is that motivates you and develop a kind of excellence, to bring to your life the same zeal I had to become Mickey Mantle, to win an MVP award. You have to find that zeal for what you want to do to make a difference in the world and learn a tremendous, tremendous amount. Can you make a difference? Amy says you can, and I'm going to agree with you, Amy. It would be terrible if I said, no, you can't make a difference. They would not invite me back here. But the power that we have seen in recent months of a worldwide peace movement is something that you must never, ever forget. My organization and many like it tried to prevent war in Iraq, and we failed. And so I could be very discouraged, and I could feel like a failure. But when I took part in the candlelit vigil at the Lincoln Memorial, where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, the candlelit vigils could be seen from satellite photos. There were 7,000 of them around this country. There were others around the world. When I demonstrated peacefully in Washington and New York, there were 11 million people simultaneously in the streets saying, we care about peace. They were not anti-American. They were not against our troops. They were not subversive. They were imagining a world where Iraqi children, American GIs, would be safe. And so for me, understanding that power of global public opinion, that when you stand with your candle, how many of you have been to a candlelight vigil of that sort? I think we're going to sing, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, this little light. Well, we'll go back to the real musicians later, but when you're standing there, you should feel the power of collective humanity and public opinion that is beginning to make a difference on this planet. President Bush, who was indeed the most powerful man on the planet, at least had to stop and think. Shall I attack? Shall I not? Shall I talk to the United Nations? shall I not? I personally think he should have. But what is more important for your generation is that now many of you will travel and work overseas. You'll be in places, as I have been, in Africa. You will see the faces of hunger and concern. You'll be in Asia, in Europe, where I just came back, or Italy and Germany, where the people there were thoroughly against war and not anti-U.S. They said to me, "We love the United States. You all sing and smile and laugh. You're so friendly. And you have a wonderful country that we love to visit. And you are the people that defeated fascism, that created a free Italy, a free Germany. And that is why it is so sad for us to see that you may not be living up to the fullest of your ideals of peace and justice around the world." Well, now we can tell them together that there are young people and older people around this country and around the world who share a vision of peace.